Welcome to the Business Development Podcast, brought to you by the Global Business Development Association, delivering the strategies and tactics to boost your career and corporate growth.
Hello, BD pros, and welcome to the Global Business Development Association podcast called What is Business Development? And today we have a fantastic guest. He's a business development book author. His name is Scott Love. The name of his book is Rainmaker Confidential: How Top Professionals Make Smart Business Development Investments of Time, Treasure, and Talent. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Scott. Scott is the president of the Attorney Search Group, and he's led that company since 2009. The Attorney Search Group recruits only partners and groups in corporate finance, private equity, and investment management practice areas. He's also the host of the Rainmaking podcast that he's been recording since 2008, and I think he's at about 250 episodes, and that puts him at the top 2% of podcasts that help you to get more business, better business, and all the business from your clients. It's a podcast for professional service firms, law firms, and professional salespeople to discover the secrets of the world's leading experts in client development, business development, sales, closing, prospecting, networking, negotiation, influence, motivation, and achievement. I'll also point out that Scott is a fellow Naval Academy grad. He's from the mediocre class of 1992 minus 3. Well, we all can't be as illustrious as the class of 1992. So we'll, but let's jump into his book a little bit. I'll give you a quick overview about it. And I really think it's a fantastic book, published in 2021 with his co-authors, Henry DeVries and Mark LeBlanc. You can't ask your most successful competitors and peers their secrets of rainmaking, right? That would be awkward, impractical, and sometimes illegal. But it pays to compare yourself to your successful peers. So the three of them, they went behind closed doors and asked the tough questions. They asked more than 100 successful rainmakers what they're investing more in and what they're cutting back on, and what are their go-to strategies. In other words, how are they investing their time, treasure, and talent? So this is a rainmaking R&D book. You've no doubt heard of using OPM, other people's money, to grow your business, but this book is about using OPE, other professionals' experience, to grow your business. This book is for those who serve in roles such as the CEO, general manager, principal, partner, head of an office, business unit, or practice for professional services firms, especially those in the fields of accounting, dental consulting, financial services, management consulting, marketing, advertising, executive services, software development, technology, and law firm management. And suffice it to say, with BD in the title, this is for business developers too. So Scott Love, welcome to the show. We can't wait to hear all about your book.
Thank you, Tony. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me as a guest on your show.
So Scott, you've had a great career in business development. And I think, like a lot of folks, when I look at your background, it's kind of a varied path into the profession. So how did you get into business development?
Well, it started in sales. After I was in the Navy, I got into B2B sales. I worked for a telecom company, which had a 2-week intensive in-person sales training program. And that's when I learned you don't need to be a closer. You just need to lead people to close. You just ask questions. So it's their idea, and you learn how to direct them. And so I got some really good fundamentals. In 95, I got into recruiting 30 years ago. And I learned that in recruiting, I have a double sell. I have to sell my services to my prospective clients. They engage me, whether it's contingent or retained, and then I have to sell their opportunity to professionals. So I always say that people that are in sales, well, sales is the gateway career to recruiting, because recruiting, it's the purest form of sell, because we're selling a product or a service that might not show up. We're selling something that's intangible. We're selling opportunity. So the whole opportunity itself of recruiting is 100% sales.
Wow, that's great. Recruiters are doubly better at business development than probably everybody else because you have, as you say, the double sale,
That's
which
right.
really puts you in a challenging position because you have to constantly be in balance, right? I mean, you have to have your client's best interests at heart, but then you also have to have those of those interests of the individual candidates at heart, and a lot of candidates, right? It's not just one specific candidate. You have to be very nimble to understand everybody's uh, explicit needs and their intrinsic needs.
Absolutely right. And that's what I feel in my niche of recruiting, not just lawyers, but like you said, corporate and finance partners for global law firms. These are sophisticated people that have a lot to lose. And they've been trained to be guarded and skeptical anyways. So I have to earn trust. So you can't be seen as the Wolf of Wall Street in that type of sales. So I call it, of course, business development because I'm selling to professional services providers, the firms, then also the practitioners. So it's a very nuanced, delicate form of sale.
Yeah, it sure is. And Scott, I'll tell you, you're in a safe environment here. You don't have to use air quotes when you say the word business development. Okay.
Thank you, Tony.
for, for, for those listening, Scott used air quotes when he used the words business development,
Right.
and let's not use that dirty word of sales. Let's just
That's
call it
right.
business
I know.
development.
Yeah.
But all kidding aside, I really like what you said about building trust.
Mhm.
Building trust. And in the business development body of knowledge, for the listeners that are business development professionals, right there front and center in the beginning of the business development body of knowledge, it's all about trust. Trust is the first principle of business development. Everything that you do, every deal requires trust. And you have to build that trust based on neuroscience. This isn't guessing. This isn't happenstance. This isn't hearsay. This is neuroscience that proves it has to be based on trust. So, obviously, you're a high trust individual, and you engaged a number of these rainmakers who obviously figured out how they could build trust at scale. So, tell us a little bit about why you wrote the book with your co-author, Scott.
Sure. So I have known Henry DeVries for decades. I would quote him in articles I would write. He would quote me in articles that he wrote. He owns an independent publishing company. And then Mark LeBlanc, past president of National Speakers Association, very successful speaker on sales and client development. He does a lot within the financial services industry. He'd been a guest on my show as well several times. And Henry and Mark had written books together. And Henry reached out to me and said, Mark and I are co-authoring a book on rainmaking. And because you talk to rainmakers all day long, and Tony, when I recruit them, I'm moving them from one firm to another. I'm reading their business plans. I'm reading the data of who their clients are and how they plan to move that business over and get business. So I had that inside information, so to speak, with what goes on in the inner workings of a rainmaker's mind. And so Henry invited me to write the book. And he did all the heavy lifting because he owns a publishing company in terms of how to publish it, getting it into an audiobook format, coming up with a lot of the marketing materials. So I had the easy part. I just had to write the book, or a third of it. I wrote about a third of it.
That's great. You had the easy part to writing
Easy
the
part.
book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I think what's really interesting about the work that you do, and correct me if I'm wrong, but everybody you're recruiting for, I mean, these are high-powered titles. These are
They are.
CEO,
Yes.
these are partners at law firms and
Yeah.
investment management firms. It sounds like for every individual you recruit, regardless of the vertical, they have to have business development skills, right?
Yeah. They do.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's a real specialist, let's say a tax partner, they're serving the deal partners. But those people, like I mentioned, corporate and finance people, they're more of, kids that spent too much time in the library after school. The corporate M&A people, they're like the cowboys. They're the swashbuckling rainmakers. So they're different personas that I deal with, but all of them have to be really good at growing their book of business, being really good at their craft of being a practitioner, and also building trust with clients.
Yeah, building that trust with clients and being able to do that in a very productive way, in a very positive way that actually brings revenue to the firm. And I always like to tell folks that I meet that are in their 20s, early 30s, and they're looking to advance their career. I always tell them, if you can be a rainmaker, your revenue level is, it's infinite. I mean, it almost
You have
really,
options. You have options.
and those are and if I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I think if you look at the pathway for those that are the successful partners in the law firms, or, successful leaders in some of these firms that you talk about, it's the folks who are rainmakers. It's the folks who know how to generate revenue for the firm. They're great at their profession. They're great lawyers. They're great. They could do all of the operations, right? But what distinguishes them from others, and particularly in their wallet, is the fact that they are rainmakers, right?
Yeah. And I think they learn the art, just like you talk about, of how to become a rainmaker. And I like the fact, Tony, that you bring neuroscience into it. You're the only one in the world that I've seen that really takes that perspective to client development. So that's different. You're distinct in that regard. You've got a unique perspective. And for everybody listening, look for Tony's podcast interview on my show in the next couple of weeks, where he kind of goes into that. But I think all these people are really good at finding where opportunities are and learning how to build that trust and articulate how they're the ones that can solve that problem. But here's the other thing also, they can't push too hard. And when you're dealing with clients like that, they just can't push too hard. Like I said, it's not Wolf of Wall Street here, but it's building an irrefutable position that you are the one that can solve their problem through thought leadership and other things like that we can get into.
Well, Scott, you're very generous with your praise. Thank you for that very lavish praise about the podcast and my work in the business development body of knowledge. But enough of that. I think you've really built a lot of anticipation about the gouge that's inside your fantastic book. So let's jump
Great.
into Rainmaker Confidential and your top 3 business development tactics from the book. And there it is. Scott's holding it up for folks that are listening in on the podcast. You can see it in video. It's there in paperback. It's on Amazon, of course, and you can get it also in Kindle and Audible version. So that's great. You can go for a walk and listen to Scott Love's wonderful insights from hundreds of rainmakers. So let's jump into it, Scott. Let's talk about the number one tactic that you have in the book.
So, and it's kind of a big bucket, but it's thought leadership. And we could parse that. We could spend 5 days having a thought leadership seminar because it's so important. But I'm going to say it's number one because some people just haven't made that decision to do anything about that. And when you make that decision and, oh, I might be rejected. What if they don't choose me to speak at the conference? Well, I don't want to be on a panel that might be too self-promotional. And I'll tell you this, that if you believe that you have a certain gift of your work, and if you don't put that in front of people, you're doing them a disservice. And there's a good way that you can promote yourself without seeming salesy or overly promotional, because I personally feel uncomfortable with that. And you don't ever have to tout your own or toot your own horn. You just want to get other people that toot it for you because they see you as someone that saved the day for them. So you have to be comfortable, though, at least putting yourself in the spotlight. And a couple of easy ways, and kind of for tip number one, let me give you 3 different easy things you can do. Number one is write a white paper, otherwise known as an article. Start with a story. I'll never forget the time I had a client that had this problem, and then come up with step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, and then end it with a reference back to that original story. And if you follow these 3 steps, you'll never have that problem again. And 700, 800 words. So write that. What do you do with that? You can send that to a trade association. And guess what? They're always looking for content. And guess what? Number 2, now that trade association, I'd be willing to bet that they want to have you speak at one of their after dinner presentations every month or a Zoom session for their members. And number 3, you can sit on a panel or speak at one of their conferences. So that's number 1, Tony. Thought leadership. How'd we do on that one so far?
Well, Scott, I always love listening to your podcast because you do not waste words. Everything you say is concise and highly concentrated. And in just a few minutes, I think I have about 5 minutes to unpack with you. So if we could pause right there because you shared so much with a thought leadership. I think these days some people cringe instinctively when they hear that word thought leadership. But that's not what you're talking about. You're not talking about the pablum that's peddled on a lot of social media platforms with the obvious content where it's like, okay, I read what you said, but I already know that, and I think a lot of people know that. Give me something that is inspiring, something that's provoking, something that is unique. Tell me about a trend. Tell me about a story. And I really like how you emphasize the word story.
Yeah.
And as they say, stories sell. Actually, there's neuroscience that supports that humans remember stories, that we've been sitting around the campfire telling stories for eons. This is how we learn as humans. This is what we remember as humans. We love the story. And its stories are easy, right? These are your personal perspectives. It's truly unique. Nobody else can copy your story.
That's right.
Nobody lived your life experiences. And that can be scary for people. I like how you really emphasize the piece that there's a fair amount of anxiety for people.
Mhm.
Um, Being in the military, I was in high stress environments. I know you were as well, Scott. Um, but I got to tell you, the first time I posted my first LinkedIn post, my trigger finger was hovering over that mouse key, with a high anxiety of like, oh wow, what are people going to think? Is this going to be absolutely ridiculous? Um, and then I was very encouraged. I was very encouraged after I clicked that post button, and I saw about 10 impressions
Yeah.
and no likes. And you know what? No, my mom thought it was a great post, so it it was all good. And that's the thing. I've been posting on LinkedIn pretty consistently now for a year. And this is about the 1 year point. Started the podcast a few months ago. Each time I started something new, one new method or whatnot on LinkedIn, there was a certain amount of anxiety. But now it's second nature, and there are people that may not click the like button, but I get a lot of impressions, and I get a lot of people who come up to me at conferences or socials at meetings. They're like, Tony, I love your podcast. I love what you're posting on LinkedIn. I'm like, that's great. Could I introduce you to the link button? I mean, the like button. I mean, this is no. We call those lurkers, those folks that look at your post, that watch your post, but they don't click the like button, don't engage.
Well,
That's perfectly
here's
fine.
one tip. Here's one tip, Tony. So, for example, I wrote an article on law firm mergers because I do that, but it's hard for me to just cold call people to merge their firm in. So I have a lot of people that know law firm founders. And I wrote an article on law firm strategy that sometimes merging is the best decision of a small firm. And so I wrote that article, and then I made a list of about 30 to 40 people that I know that know those law firms. And I sent them all a request. Can you do me a favor? Can you like, comment, and reshare this article? I posted on LinkedIn. Here it is. And guess what? About 80% of them did that. And so now built some of its own momentum. So that's one thing you can do when you write that article. Before you send it out, talk to some of your friends, maybe some colleagues in your firm, and ask them to like it, reshare it. And so it's not contrived. You're not being duplicitous. This is just good strategy. People want to help you. You're good at what you do. You've solved problems for others. You can solve problems for people you don't even know yet. You need to bring that thought leadership front and center, and don't feel like you're in this all on your own. Reach out to people. The best way you can build relationships with people is to say, hey, can I ask for your help? Obviously not strangers, but people that you know, where there's already some sort of relationship. So there's kind of your sub tip on that right now for everybody.
Wow. This is great, Scott. I'm a big fan of community.
I told a story, Tony. I told a story about what I did. So we're kind of tying it all together right there, just like that.
Yeah, you sold me, Scott. You sold me on. I'm a big fan of community-led growth, and some people talk about, hey, find your top 100, find your top 150. For you, you said 30 people that know you, that like you, that are really engaged with you, and they think the world of you. And they're connected to the folks that you want to engage with. You're leveraging other people's audiences. Same thing when you're talking about the trade associations, reaching out to them and saying, hey, I have an article. If you're interested, it's a thought leadership piece. And, I'd love for you to publish it and share it with the community, because, here's the final thought to unpack there is that you talk about operating from a position of high value, sharing high value, but also that internal voice that says, I really like how you said it, Scott. You said it would be unfair to people if you did not share your gifts,
You owe
your
it to them.
views. You owe it to them. And I always tell people, BD is like being a lifeguard. Okay. I'm not the cops. I can't force you to come with me. That's sales. That's their job. BD, I am here to save your life. And if I have a life ring for you, then I will throw it to you.
Yeah.
That is my job now. And that's not salesy. That's not pushy. Now you have to make sure you find the right people who have the need.
Yeah.
And that's the key part. But thank you so much for that tactic number one, which is thought leadership. And doing thought leadership from a position of high value. Okay, let's
Right.
let's jump into tactic number two.
Technique number two is asking good questions. And I remember when I started in legal recruiting, I would meet with firms. I just didn't know a lot about that niche. So I asked good questions. And what I realized was that they're making a judgment about me based on the quality of questions that I ask. So you get information that way. If you're a good question asker, you don't have to worry about being a good closer. You let them close it, and that's something I learned. I don't write as much about that as a thought leadership, but that's something I thought I should share as a good second tactic for today.
Yeah, that's great. And as a podcast host, I listen to your podcast and you ask those very deep, insightful questions. They're not pre-canned standard questions like, hey, what are your top 3 BD tactics? But but so yeah, so give us an example of what you mean by questions. I always find that journalists are some of the best question askers because they ask kind of these Socratic, somewhat rhetorical questions, but
Right.
so give us an example of what you're talking about.
So how will this problem impact your company's situation? If we can solve this problem, how will that? And basically, they're implication questions. If you're familiar with Neil Rackham, spin selling, implication, SPI, situation, problem, implication, need. I I kind of developed a model, something that I've taught people derived from that on the format of how you ask questions. And you're asking questions as you're building trust and rapport with them. Now, here's a personal question. Well, gosh, Ted, how will that help you in reaching your goals within the company? You mentioned that you haven't been home in the last 6 weeks to see your kids' Little League game. If we can solve this problem, will that help you do that? Yeah, you're my guy. And when you realize that you're not selling to companies, you're selling to individuals, and people have a personal agenda, and you find out what that is, and you ask questions related to that, and you got to have the right kind of trust to do that. When you do that, then they want to work with you.
Yeah, I think what resonated with me there is you're asking the questions to learn their story, right? You just gave a
Yeah.
quick little story of, hey, you haven't been to your kid's little league game in months or weeks. That's very difficult. And here's the thing: that story, it didn't talk about explicit requirements. It didn't say, well, we need a CEO with 30 years experience, and we need somebody that's been in these industries, and so on and forth. I mean, those are extrinsic requirements. Um, your competitors, your other recruiters, your other business developers, they can figure that out too, right? And those are explicit, sometimes even publicly published
Mhm.
for an RFP. But what you just talked about was asking the question that leads to the story that reveals their intrinsic requirements, right?
That's
They're
right.
not going to publish anything about missing their kid's little league game for
Mhm.
6 weeks on end. And that really affects them internally. And your competitors, they don't hear that. They don't see that. And so when you speak to that, when you write to that in your bid, then that really resonates with the prospect. So
Absolutely right.
that's a great way to talk about how to ask the right questions. Ask the questions of the story. So,
Absolutely
wow,
right.
very powerful, very powerful. Okay, let's jump into tactic number 3.
That's professionalism. That means do what you say you're going to do, even in the little things. If you tell your client, let me get that document to you before the end of the day, and it's not a big, important document, they don't have this impending deadline, but you told them you get it to them by the end of the day. Maybe it's just a data sample of a small piece of data. And if you don't do it, your client will remember you made a commitment and you did not follow through. Even though it's little, they're going to remember that. They're not going to tell you, of course, but just remember, there are 10 other people that are eager to take your spot in your relationship with your client. And that's why I don't want to say I'm paranoid, but I just know there's people that are smarter and better looking than me. Well, maybe smarter than me that want to get my client's attention. They want to get my client's attention. And I'm trying to keep that relationship, not like I'm having to sell them. Aren't you glad you're working with me? But in my professionalism, in my work, I fulfill that expectation every time. So if you can't fulfill that expectation, I know I said that I'd get that to you by the end of the day. I've got to go pick up my kid from dance. I'll get that to you later tonight. Something as little as that. saves the day. They weren't thinking anything of it, but they remember that you're the kind of person that says you're going to do something and you do it. You show up on time, or Tony, as we learned as midshipmen, 3 minutes early. You're there 3 minutes early. And I think just that professionalism builds trust. It's not obvious, it's not overt. They're not going to say anything. They're just going to tell you, I'm sorry, our account is up for review with you. We're going to look at some other competitors of yours because we thought we should maybe take our business in a different direction. What they're saying is that you drop the ball one too many times on the little things. And if you're going to drop the ball on the little things, eventually you will drop the ball on the big things. So that's what I mean is professionalism, Tony. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that one, Scott. I think I was getting ready to break out into a cold sweat. You're getting me emotional now. A lot of these memories of my you are my upperclassman.
That's right.
Is
Great stuff.
with your so I'm reliving a lot of these hard learned lessons about look, you have to be at a certain location at a certain time. Be there. Even in the absurdity of the Naval Academy, where it has very little impact on anything real or consequential, those learning that it comes down to truth, right? We're all fanatics at the Naval Academy about telling the truth. We'll even do our best to trick you into not saying the truth, because the truth is fundamental to building trust. Trust consists of purpose plus empathy plus truth. The truth and telling the truth, and this is all linked to neuroscience, right? It's shown in scientific studies that when you engage in a truthful exchange of value, all right, you want X, I want Y. I will, I will give you X, you will give me Y. And if if you take it from me or you don't deliver it, then that's untruthful.
Super.
And but when you do, engage in a truthful exchange, that triggers oxytocin that then cascades into a cocktail of these brain chemicals that say, okay, I trust this person. And that's fundamental to any business development, just like we started the podcast. So let me summarize your top 3 tactics, Scott. Tactic number 1 is thought leadership. And not the cringeworthy thought leadership of let me just peddle the same old pablum that everybody else is on their LinkedIn post. This is telling your stories. Yeah, it's anxiety inducing because you're sitting in front of the global tribe and saying, this is what I learned. And sometimes those are embarrassing mistakes, but you know what? Those are the stories that resonate the most with people because nobody can copy your story. And everybody wants to learn what you learn. And sometimes it's those hard learned lessons that mean the most and really move the needle. And then I think your second top tactic was questions. Asking questions that aren't the questions about the extrinsic requirements. What keeps you up late at night? When would you like this delivered? No, it's those questions that lead to those intrinsic requirements, those intrinsic needs. Tell me the story of why this is so important to you. If you don't make this step, what will happen? What will be the negative consequences? And I bet those lead to shocking revelations that set you apart from any other competitor oftentimes. So questions can be extremely powerful. And then the third point is that critical ingredient of trust building, telling the truth, truthfully delivering on what you promise. That's it. I mean, since the beginning of mankind, we realized that business was I will give you X, you will give me Y. As long as you don't smash me over the head with a club and steal it from me, then I have high trust with you and we can continue doing business. And I think at the end of the day, that's what that is the ultimate ingredients to trust building is truth telling. And Scott, you've done a lot of truth telling here today. You've shared some fascinating truth from so many rainmakers in the high trust professions in the investment world and law firms. And I just find it so fascinating. Scott, tell the folks a little bit about how they can get in touch with you if they have a need for high-powered talent in their firms or in their corporations. How can they reach out to you and your organization?
Sure. The website, I think it's the easiest, is the website for the podcast, the rainmakingpodcast.com. You can find it on the web anywhere. You can just Google the show. But the website for our show has my contact information. And then also Henry DeVries put a website together for our book, rainmakerconfidential.com, which has some other resources on there that might be helpful for people listening today. And Tony, thank you for having me on your show today. This is really good to see you again. And thank you so much for having me here.
Well, sir, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Folks, get the book, Rainmaker Confidential, How Top Professionals Make Smart Business Development Investments of Time, Treasure, and Talent. It's available on Amazon, but as Scott indicated, there's a whole separate website with additional content that you can find about the book, how to buy the book, and also how to get to Scott's podcast, where you can listen to his wonderful insights and the insights of so many rainmakers that really succeeded in their profession and grew themselves and their business. Scott Love, sir, thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for listening to the Business Development Podcast. Join our free community of corporate partners and business development professionals advancing the art, science, and ethics of the business development profession at gbdassociation.org.